I'm Tim Henriques with the Fantasy Book Ranking System, and in today's review, we're going to review The Demon Cycle. This is book 2 of The Demon Cycle. Actually, book 3, apologize. This is by Peter V. Brett. There are 4 books currently written in this one. It started off with The Warded Man, then we have The Desert Spear, The Daylight War, which is this one right here, and then The Skull Throne. And the 5th book is due out relatively shortly. So as of right now, I'm only reviewing the first 4 books. So I've read the first 4, so we're going to review that. And it's worth mentioning I read these books, well, the first one probably about 2 years ago, and then read through them relatively quickly after that, but have not read the 5th one yet. For those of you not familiar with the Fantasy Book Ranking System, the whole purpose behind this is to help you, the reader, decide if this is a book or series that's worth your time. When you read reviews on Amazon's, most fantasy books seem to get 3.5 to 4.5 stars, and even after reading the review or a whole bunch of reviews, you often don't know if you like it because you have no idea what the other person likes. So my goal here is to compare this book to other more popular books that you likely have read, so then you can say, oh yeah, this is like this and I really enjoyed that book, or oh, it's not like that, or it's missing this important characteristic to me, or this is about something I don't really like, and again, so you can either save your time or know if you should invest or not. Secondarily, I did write this to be a little bit selfish. I wanted to break down what makes fantasy books really great, because I'm trying to dip my toe into the waters of that world as well. I've written some nonfiction books, but I'm interested in trying to write some fantasy, and so I wanted to see what the great authors did, and then see if I could at least emulate that at some level. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to rank a book on a scale of 1 to 10. A 10 is super awesome and epic, and I will give you what I think a 10 is. An 8 is pretty solid, 6 and below is quite crappy. Honestly, most books get a pretty good score because I do tend to pre-screen and at least read some reviews as we go through. Other characteristics I'm just going to describe, and then I'm going to give you what I think are some flaws, what I think are some strengths, my overall impression, and at the end I'll give that book its own unique individual FaBR score so we can compare it against other fantasy novels as well. So let's get started. So first, how epic is the story? How broad and sweeping is it? Well, I mean, it's 4 books so far. That probably gives you a hint. There's a lot of lands traveled. It seems like the entire world is kind of in danger. So this is pretty epic so far. So I'd give it a 9 out of 10, which is pretty high. Something like Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones, Star Wars is going to get a 10 for that level of epicness. How well written is it? I thought it was quite well written, so an 8.5. Good reading, no significant flaws there. Not quite up to the par of, say, Game of Thrones or A Name of the Wind, which is that true 10, but it's still good reading and generally well done. It does not detract from the story. How real does it feel? This story feels pretty real. You can kind of feel more like you're there versus just kind of watching characters on a movie. So they get into details, how things are done, pretty nitty-gritty. Some of it's, unpleasant, but that's part of it. So generally well done. Something like a First Law trilogy would be a 10. What lessons are taught? I thought the author was trying to impart some lessons there, kind of how to act, how to be, different things to do in different situations. So I thought he got a pretty good job with that. So I'd say 8.5. Something like a Star Wars is a 10. Is the book a page turner? Yeah, I think you're going to, once you pick it up, you're going to want to keep reading it. I went through pretty much the whole series once it was available, at least up till now. And so I did want to kind of find out, you get involved with the characters, you do want to see what's going on. So 8.5 for a page turner. Something like the Da Vinci Code or Maltese Falcon would get a 10 for that. How memorable is the story? Pretty memorable. You got some interesting plot lines. You got a lot of things going on, so it's a big, broad story, but definitely the main plot lines of what's going on. I can recall the story quite well, the different aspects that happen, so that definitely gets pretty high marks. Something like Star Wars would get a 10 for memorability. How memorable are the main characters? So it starts off with kind of one main character, but then it broadens out, so depending on how you define it, there's kind of like 3 really main characters and then a pretty good amount of subset secondary characters. And I could see, those characters become even more important than subsequent novels. And then each chapter is generally written from their perspective. But those main characters are pretty memorable. I think they're each kind of unique, they're each kind of different. The author does a really good job of explaining what motivates them. So I thought that was definitely a pretty strength. Something like a Conan would be a 10, like that character you never forget once you read about it. Secondary characters, there's a lot of secondary characters, so you may be able to pick out one or two that are really kind of do shine for you, but then there's also going to be so many that in a way it detracts from a little bit. So I'd say an 8 overall. Something like a Star Wars would be a 10. So this is, decent, but there's so many that it can have a slight negative given how well everything else is done. How much you want to read the next book? Same as that page turner quality, so once that one book is finished, it's not a complete story, so you want to keep going. So pretty anxious to read the next book. Something like a Game of Thrones would be 10, so it's not quite at that level, but pretty good. How rereadable is it? I should mention I have not reread these 4 books, but I do think, given the quality of writing, the intricacy of the story, all the stuff going on, I could see a desire to reread it. It's not quite like a Shakespeare or something that's super high up there, but I could see wanting to reread that, so 8.5, not a negative. I don't think it would get worse on a reread. Is how clear is good and evil? So this is more up to you if you like this or not. I do personally like stories that are a little more clearly good and evil. This is a little bit more on the murky level. So, because you get different perspectives, and then when you read one character, and then that's the mortal enemy in another character, but then you can kind of see both where they're coming from, where their history's developed, how things evolved. So it's cool in many ways, but it does kind of murky the waters, and it's a little difficult to figure out exactly what's going on, and exactly like why, what is good, what should happen or not. So it's not like a Star Wars where there's like a light and a dark side, and it's pretty obvious what's good and evil. How prevalent is magic? There's a lot of magic in this. So there's these things called wards, which is what the first book is based on, and wards basically fight off kind of evil spirits, and they're used from day one. Everybody knows about them and can kind of somewhat figure them out anyway. And then that continues on, and then the main character kind of discovers more of these powerful wards and keep going. So there's a lot of magic that takes place among the main characters, but also in the world, their magic is pretty prevalent. I thought it was well done. I didn't think it was overdone, but it is just a high magic world, both in the world and in the main character, something like Harry Potter. What's going on with the story? This is a mature story in terms of age level. There's pretty graphic sex scenes. I thought that took away from it just a little bit. I didn't think they necessarily added to it. I usually don't. They weren't quite pornographic in detail, but pretty explicit. And one of the characters, super attractive and uses her kind of sex to get things that she wants. There's other sex scenes in the book. So kind of like Game of Thrones, I would save this for more your mature readers for sure. Is the series finished? No, unfortunately it's not finished. The good news is there's not this ginormous lag time like there is with, say, Name of the Wind or Game of Thrones in between the books. So he does at least seem to be putting them out at a decent clip, so you can't really fault him for that. But it's not finished, so for those of you that like closure, you gotta wait and see, and we'll see if the 5th book finishes or not. It's possible there'll even be more after that. That would not surprise me. What flaws did the book have? It's kind of interesting. I've read now well over 1,000 pages in this series, and this is obviously a fantasy-based medieval type book, and not once does he mention swords. It's obviously, it's got to be totally intentional. He must have something against swords. So everybody uses spears or other weapons, but swords are never mentioned. I think he just wanted to be different there, probably tired of the trite sword in the fantasy world. But I thought that was a little odd. To me, the biggest, most annoying thing is the names of some of the secondary characters. Basically, there's kind of like a family, kind of like an Egyptian family, and then he tried to keep in kind of the way they're named, and everybody starts with an A, and then it's like a slight deviation. But, literally in one paragraph, there's like 8 A names, and even someone who's trying to pay attention into the story, no way you're going to be able to keep track of that. He does try to provide a glossary at the end, but who wants to be flipping back and forth to that? So that was a negative. And then not up there, but I mentioned I thought the sex scenes were a little bit overdone and didn't really add that much to the story. I think it could have gone along just as well without them being quite as graphic. My overall impression, however, is quite positive. This was it's an interesting initial world, and the problem that it faces is kind of cool and unique. So I thought that was pretty well done. He does a great job of giving perspective of the different characters, even though they don't like each other, and then how they interact and when they meet each other and what their version of truth and history was really cool. Though it's a well-written, interesting story, so that's always a positive. The main characters are interesting and memorable, so I think years later you'll remember those main characters, their key elements, kind of what they stood for. Didn't really have any big flaws. The things I mentioned were not deal breakers. It is not finished, which is a little bit of a negative, but again, can't really fault somebody for that. So if we give this book's overall score, well, up to book 4, since it's incomplete, I can't give it a finalized score. As of now, if the other books live up to it, I would give this a 91, which is a pretty high score. As you can see, that's a truly excellent book, a must-read, a rare. And that does then gonna crack our top 3 for incomplete fantasy series. If you want to see the other 2, check out some of the other reviews on here. But anything 90 up is pretty epic, pretty awesome. Really highly recommend if it's anything in the genre that you like. I think you'll definitely enjoy this series. If you want to see other reviews, keep watching this YouTube channel or go to my website, timhenriques.com. If you want me to review other books, feel free to post it. If you have questions, comments, if you think I'm an idiot, feel free to let me know and we can chat about it below.